Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 18th, 2012 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We have a quorum present tonight, so I'll call the meeting to order. The first item on tonight's agenda is to approve the minutes of the June 6, 2012 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? If not, I'll declare them approved as submitted. Move on to the consent agenda. We have 5 items under the consent agenda this evening. Briefly, they are the Buchanan Estates, Section 6, Phase 2, a final plat of 42 lots on 20.14 acres, zoned R15, Rutherford County, located along Aldridge Drive, Farrah Brothers developer. Oakland Park, site plan for a park on 8 acres, zoned Commercial Medical, located north of Robert Street, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Murfreesboro Park and Recreation is the developer. ETC Gymnastics, Lot 3, a site plan for 10,700 square feet on an addition on 1.92 acres, zoned heavy industrial, located along Haley Road. ETC Gymnastics is the developer. Hobgood Elementary, a site plan for 12,825 square foot addition to an existing elementary school located at 307 South Barrett Lane. Murfreesboro City Schools is the developer. And a mandatory referral for the old 46 kV transmission line from Haynes Drive between James Edmond Court and Jim Houston Street, north to Siegel Middle School property between Ever Road Drive and Bishop Street, City of Murfreesboro's applicant. Is there any members of the Planning Commission, any members of the staff, or anybody in tonight's audience like any of these items removed from the consent agenda for further discussion? If there's not anybody, we're ready for a motion.
Move for adoption of the consent agenda.
Second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to the public hearing portion of our agenda tonight. We have 4 public hearings scheduled for this evening. The first public hearing will be a zoning application for approximately 15.9 acres located at 3240 Memorial Boulevard from RS-15 to Commercial Highway. R. Brooks Gerald Trust is the applicant. Ms. Ely, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Planning Commission members. Our first public hearing this evening is the first of 3, which represents some property located along the eastern side of Memorial Boulevard, or Highway 231. This first public hearing is to consider rezoning approximately 15.9 acres of the property owned by the estate of Brooks Gerald from its current RS-15 zone to CH, Highway Commercial District. The property shaded in orange on the map that's in your packets and on the screen. You can see that this is the portion that is closest to Highway 231. The property is currently zoned RS-15, which is single-family residential district, and the proposed zone change is to zone it to CH, Highway Commercial District. The property to the north is a part of the Brent Mead subdivision, which is zoned single-family residential district. The properties to across Highway 231 or Memorial Boulevard are zoned CH, Highway Commercial District, RM16, multifamily residential district, and those are part of the Haynes property, which Planning Commission and City Council reviewed and approved a zoning change for last year. Property to the south is zoned CL, Local Commercial District, and it's a developed convenience market gas station. There's a liquor store there as well, and then, of course, the bank. And then along the south side is some property that's used as a mobile home park. I think the number of units that have been there have varied through time, but it's also zoned RS-15. And the property directly to the east of this property is actually a part of the same parcel, but it's a part of a separate zoning request. But if you go just beyond the second part of this property, the property is zoned RS-12, which is a part of the Brent Mead Annex subdivision. This property was annexed in 1995, and because there was no companion zoning change, the property came in the city zoned RS-15, single-family residential district. This property was a part of a larger tract that was developed in the early 1990s when Mr. Gerald sold the rear portion of the property, and that's now our developed Brent Mead Annex subdivision. To staff's knowledge, this application is not being motivated by a specific development plan, so we're not aware of any user that's interested in the site, but they have requested that this zoning change take place. I'm going to put another map on the screen just to give you orient you a little bit further. This is an ortho photo, and it's also in your program books. You can see the area zone purple is what this first public hearing is considering, and so it's to zone that just less than 16 acres to CH. The areas shaded blue and purple are both a part of the estate of Brooks Gerald property. And the next public hearing will be to consider changing the parcel shaded, or the portion of property shaded blue. Our third public hearing will be to consider changing the zoning of the property that's shaded orange, which is under different ownership, and that will be to zone it CH. Staff separated the zoning requests into 3 so that would give folks an opportunity to speak specifically to each zoning change request. So with each public hearing, you'll have an opportunity to address the request from the Brooks Geralds to zone it CH, then the request to zone it to multifamily residential district. Our third public hearing will provide an opportunity for anybody interested to speak to the rezoning request made to the property to the north to CH. So if you have any questions either before or after this public hearing, staff will be glad to answer them. Otherwise, you should conduct a public hearing before discussing this item and recommending an action to City Council.
Okay. Any questions from Ms. Ely before we open the public hearing? Is there a representative of the applicant here to make a comment?
There is. Randy Caldwell with Reagan Smith. Margaret Ann, is the controls still here?
You got
for
it.
the presentation. Again, appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I've also got Brick Murphy with Murphy & Murphy that Brick and I would like to do a presentation. Let me say that, just to go over the dynamics of the proposal that we have before you tonight, and if it would be okay, as we did in the workshop, what I would like to do is address these properties as a whole on this. So we would like to do our presentation for both 5A, B, and C with this initial item, and then we'll be available to answer questions after the public hearings for the remaining part of that. So with that said, again, we're representing the Brooks Gerald Trust and Wayne and Kathy Nobles on this. And as I said in the workshop, these are 2 separate property owners that could be developed on their own, but there is some opportunity here that they got together and saw an opportunity to work together, and primarily for a couple of reasons that I think would benefit the community. One, there's enough land mass here to create some acreage that could support a high-quality development. And on the heels of that, it's also allowing us to consider some higher design standards as part of this, which the applicants are willing to incorporate in the form of restrictive covenants that can address some of the concerns that we have heard at a neighborhood meeting, but also that we have anticipated that would be some concerns above and beyond what we heard even last week. And I'm going to kind of go over that in a little bit more detail. So there's some opportunities that exist with these 2 property owners working together. I'm going to kind of go over, hopefully not too much repetitiveness from what Margaret Ann said, but let me get to F5 here. And again, just revisit a little bit where the properties are. As Margaret Ann says, you start to see again the Nobles property, which is owned by Kathy and Wayne, is the 4.5 acres basically to the north. That is the long, narrow configuration. And of course, the Brooks Gerald's estate is the 26 acres that wraps around that. As Margaret Ann had stated, Brent Mead is to the north and the east of the property, and we have some commercial developments to the south. And across the street is the Haynes property that was recently rezoned, not so recently rezoned, but was rezoned with some commercial highway on the frontage and some multi-family on the back. Existing conditions, just to talk a little bit through some of the natural features of the property, because we did, when we went through the neighborhood meeting, we did present this to the community. Topographically, there's nothing really that is, restricting, good development on the property. The topo is rather gentle and rolling, and it primarily drains towards Memorial, but there is a portion of it that drains into Brent Mead, which we heard a lot of concerns about. Now I'll address that as we go through the presentation. But again, in total, roughly 36 acres here in totality. Primary access, only access is via Memorial Boulevard. We've got about 925 linear foot of frontage along there. And then your other main accesses to the north and the south are Kings Ridge and Brent Mead Drive, and then, of course, Regal Drive that is to the south. And again, on that, even further south, you start to see the Regency Square development that is further to the south. Looking at the land use along this corridor, and we just, we felt this was important to communicate both to the neighborhood and also to the Planning Commission. This is an inventory of the uses that only go from Thompson Lane to Osborne. And what you see on there is a mix of commercial uses, institutional uses that are along there, basically non-residential. 18 in total, that are already along that corridor. The only really single family, typical RS-15 that you see is where Brent Mead basically extends out to Memorial. So you're seeing that this portion of this corridor, at least, has already started to develop very much in a commercial fashion, and that has a lot to do with it being a 5-lane arterial and Thompson Lane being there, and just the opportunities that exist from a commercial development standpoint. This proves itself out in the zoning maps. When you look at the surrounding zoning, you see in yellow the RS-15, again, where our property is. You see a mix of commercial highway, commercial limited that is flanking the property. The PCD is again the Regency Square development. You start to see the depth of that. Also want to point out the RM16 that has been used as a transitional zoning between some of the commercial highway and the residential, and that of course was on the Haynes property, and then also back behind the public, so where the existing apartment community there was, that zoning was used as a transitional use as well. So we took hints from this, I think, as far as considering what we would ask for. And again, this is reflective of the classifications that we're asking for with the CH zoning. And the RM16, again, utilizing that as the transitional use between us and Brent Mead to the east on there. And again, with the 16 acres roughly, CH on Greta is 4.5 on the Nobles, and then the RM16 on the back side. What was driving this depth to a degree? Again, our efforts were a couple things. One, again, create enough land mass there to accommodate a larger potential retail user on there. Again, I want to reiterate here that I think there's been some discussion out there that we know who that is, and we're not divulging it. I can tell you we do not. There has been no discussions. There's no deal in the makings on this. We are looking at this primarily as a land use issue as we have considered this. So this provides us an opportunity to create some acreage that will accommodate to some of the larger users. Again, the depth is driven by a couple things on this. One, the Nobles property has a lot to do with that. That's a long, narrow piece of property. Doesn't make sense to split that up from a zoning standpoint, but it also starts to create the depth needed for some of these other potential users on there. So we took the cue from that back line and continued it to the south on the Gerald property. And as you can see, the other benefit to this, as we visited with the staff with our application on this, connectivity was important as well. And you'll see the stub out, if you will, to the Regency Square to the south, that if that opportunity ever arose to connect this, we wanted to take advantage of that opportunity. So in totality with the CH, we have 16 acres and 4.5, which is 20.5, but I'm going to show you another slide after this. In reality, because of the way we are splitting the zoning up on this, there will have to be a public road built that would basically, being Memorial being our primary access, would have to extend from Memorial back to serve the RM16. That's going to take about another 1.5 acres out of the developable area of this commercial highway zoning. So in reality, we're going to be left with about 19 acres on that. Heard a lot of questions. Does that support a Walmart when we were in the neighborhood meetings, and it does not. The super Walmarts, the super Targets, those very large box users, they're more on the lines of 23 acres or plus when you're looking at that kind of square footage on the site to accommodate their parking needs, detention, water quality, and all that. So this would not accommodate that size. Now, some of these retailers are going to more neighborhood friendly. They have a bunch of different footprints that they're developing relative to bringing down the square footage of the buildings to be more in context with communities, and that's happening with a number of some of the retailers. So again, the square footage is going to be limited because of the relative to the really larger ones as it relates to this. The RM16 also is a little different than the Haynes because it's only 10 acres in size. I think across the street with the Haynes it was more in the lines of 22 acres, which really accommodates more your typical apartment developer on this site. And in my experience with multifamily is that 10 acres does not typically accommodate that typical, what you might think of apartment, 3-story garden style complex. So we really see this developing out more in the lines of attached residential products that might develop with that, maybe a senior community, but never say never. That doesn't say that a multifamily developer might not come in there with 3 stories, and we have accommodated that in some of the restrictive covenants that we've developed as part of this to protect the community. Talk about access again, because this is something that we looked at again closely with the staff as part of our application with both your planner and your the head of your traffic engineering, Dana, and we really started to establish where the primary access would be on this. And one thing we did hear out of the community was really concerned about protecting the potential that Brett Mead intersection and the Regal Drive intersection could be signaled in the future if warrants were ever met at this. So we work really closely on the spacing to make sure that it would be appropriate if signals were ever warranted at each of those intersections, that we would be able to accommodate that, and we put good traffic planning into place as part of that. And that was really looked closely as part of that. Again, you can start to see how the public road, because it has to shift to the north to create that spacing, it cuts into the developable area of the CH zoning on that, where it basically cuts that 20.5 down to about 19 acres as part of that. So again, something that we looked at very closely as part of our application and with the staff to make sure we planned appropriately. We had a community meeting back last Tuesday, and these are some of the issues we heard. Traffic, again, which I've just addressed. Blasting was a concern expressed, but the fact is that I think, as the planning director in the meeting said, Murfreesboro and Rutherford County, I think, is just on one big rock. And any development that would occur along here, even if it's single family, would more than likely would require blasting due to the trenching for utilities. But there is requirements by the state that a pre-blast survey be done that protects the neighborhood, protects the neighbors, but also protects the developer. Noise, I'm going to go into a little bit. We heard a lot about that. Drainage, again, I know this body looks at that very closely as well as the staff does, that we got to make sure that we don't affect drainage impact drainage onto adjacent properties. And then buffer treatments, building setback and heights, which I'll go into detail on, and Brick will even go into more detail on. And then it's not listed here, just the need for more commercial in this area. I'm just going to go briefly on some restrictive covenants issues. Again, with the RM16, when we looked at the perimeter of that, the one thing that did come to mind was Overhill Court did not have a very good existing tree line back behind it. The other side does, off of Brent Mead, does as well. But the one thing that we did look at, we have basically, in the restrictive covenants, which Brick will go over a little bit, we basically adopted what was developed for the Haynes property. So we wanted to be consistent with what was applied there. The building setbacks are the same as far as the criteria for 3-story units, and whether windows or doors face out in that area. The one thing that is different that we did ask for, or that we are building into the restrictive covenants, is if it's less than 3 stories, it would revert back to the RM16 25-foot setback. That 25-foot setback, though, however, is consistent if this was developed under an RS-12 or R10, RS-10 classification. That's what the minimum setback is, even with the single-family, with some of your other residential zoning districts. So we don't think we're overreaching that. Same architectural commitments. On the buffers, again, what would typically be required on this is basically a Type C buffer, which is a 12-foot wide buffer. We are committed to a 20-foot wide buffer on this. As Haynes, we've even gone above and beyond in the fact that we are committing to a Type D density as far as the planting density. So we're stepping it up a notch relative to the thickness of the plant material that would be in there, as well as the height of the evergreen trees in there. Minimum is 6 foot, and we're building into that that they would be minimum 8 foot. So again, we're going above and beyond what was even across the street related to the buffers. And then, of course, tree preservation, we're committed to that. In the CH, again, we're adopting, and Brick can probably say this, probably 70% of what was for the Haynes. This is a little bit different animal because the Haynes was more out parcels. And again, we're seeing a potential larger users given the increase in the acreage. Again, we're committed to the 20-foot buffer, and again, agreeing which we're a 15-foot wide buffer is actually required type D buffer, so we're going above and beyond with that with an additional 5 foot, and again also committed to the increase in the evergreen plant material height. The one thing we are asking for, that if the nobles for some reason, if they do not work together, we are building in there, because they're 4.5 acres, and there'll be obviously less impact on the neighbors because of the developability of that property, that we revert back to the 15-foot buffer. Some things we heard about noise. Again, it was primarily a lot related to service-oriented with retail development. We have put some language in there relative to the service that drives, creating some additional buffer there, some additional separation when serving larger facilities. The service area orientation, where they would not face the neighborhood, it would have to be oriented away from them. And also language in there relative to the dumpster and utility equipment locations, and make sure those are being screened appropriately, located appropriately to have the least impact on the neighborhood. Architectural treatment is essentially the same as it relates to any of the building facades that face the neighborhood or the public realm, any public street. So we're committed to basically the same architectural treatment again that was on the Haynes property as it relates to that. With that, I'm going to let Brick kind of go through bullet point. Again, this is just, I think, a bullet point recap of some things we've been working on, and obviously this is an evolving process, but let him go through that, and then I would like to make a couple conclusionary remarks.
Good evening, Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission staff. I'm Brick Murphy of the law firm of Murphy & Murphy, and we represent the applicant, the estate of Brooks Gerald, through the widow of the estate, Mrs. Greta Gerald, and Wayne and Kathy Nobles. I'm going to give a brief presentation on some commitments that we've made in terms of restrictive covenants to the neighbors and some restrictions that we'll put on the property. The following is a summary of the high points of proposed restrictive covenants. These are based on some concerns expressed by the neighbors, and also just some good planning and some things we think would lend itself to good development. As a rule, restrictive covenants will not be enforced by the city. They are private. However, they have real teeth when it comes to development of property. They really do shape what will ultimately go there. One thing that we are very sensitive to is the existing perimeter trees. There's nothing better in terms of buffering than existing trees. We're going to preserve those trees to the extent that we can. If they are dead, then they'll need to be taken out for safety purposes, and they'll be pruned if they need to be. But we're going to supplement any existing tree lines with plantings that I'll discuss in a minute. Prohibited uses. We will put together and are putting together a list of prohibited uses. They're just things that we don't think this property is appropriate for, such as any adult-oriented businesses, tattoo parlors, any kind of industrial use, mobile home manufacturing or mobile homes, just some things that we don't think the property is appropriate for. Building facades, the side and rear facades that are viewable from the public right-of-ways are going to have similar architectural treatment. And as well as the property, if you view it from the single-family residential properties next door, we want it to have similar architectural treatment to the front facade. All buildings will have a defined base and cap, so you'll have a base and a cap to the property, kind of like what's done out in the gateway, so you'll have an interesting kind of cornice line usually. And remote walls will not be, remote walls not visible from the public realm will be allowed. Building materials, we are going to focus basically on the building materials that were allowed for the Haynes property. These building materials for the facades would include brick, textured metal siding with architectural features, which is kind of a new product, stone, real or faux, marble, scored precast concrete, smooth wood, fibrous cement siding, stucco, synthetic stucco, or EIFS. We aren't going to have vinyl except for the soffits and the windows and the trim. And service areas are something that we are very sensitive to. They will not face the existing single-family residential subdivisions. That's something we are very sensitive about. And corrugated metal will be prohibited on commercial buildings. Roof forms, that's something that architecturally we think we can focus on. They'll be used to conceal mechanical equipment and also add architectural interest. Off-street and on-street parking, parking lots are going to have to be screened. We are sensitive to that issue, and landscape elements are going to be consistent with the architecture. Building massing and orientation is something we are very concerned with. One thing that can be used in terms of architecture is main entrances. We're going to use architectural features to kind of drive the eye towards a main entrance. That's a good architectural design. And service areas are going to be oriented once again so they do not face or butt existing single-family residential. Service appurtenances, equipment, that kind of thing will be screened from the existing single-family residential. Service loop drives will have increased buffer treatment. This is your internal kind of service drives. Landscape buffering and screening, we're going above and beyond what would be required. 15 feet would be required. We're going to do a 20-foot landscape buffer. Type D density buffer, and instead of 6-foot tall evergreen plantings, we're going to do 8 feet tall. And tracts less than 5 acres, that would be the Nobles property if it developed individually, not as part of a group with the Gerald property, would just adhere to the CH requirements. Our clients are committed to adopting all of the applicable restrictive covenants for the multifamily part of the property that the Hayneses did on their RM16. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight are, and that we're very concerned and feel like we can address, are building heights. 3-story buildings shall be set at least 80 feet from the existing single-family residential developments. Buildings with no windows or decks facing existing single-family subdivisions can be within 50 feet of property lines, but that way you don't have decks or windows looking down into people's backyards. And buildings under 3 stories would adhere to the RM16 requirements. It's probably going to be a smaller type development than we anticipated on the Hayneses. It's 10 acres, so probably doesn't lend itself to the same kind of development. Buffers, once again, for the multifamily will be 20-foot abutting existing single-family residential. Once again, 12-foot buffering would be required, so we're going from 12 to 20. And rather than a type C buffer, which would be required, we're going to do a type D buffer. And once again, in this area, the RM16, rather than a 6-foot tall evergreen plantings, we're going to do 8, so we've already committed to 2 additional feet there. And garages would be allowed within 10 feet of property lines, but the idea there is you would have a masonry wall or a brick wall that would that would be additional buffering, basically. And the idea is that could be a little closer because it would serve as additional screening. We wouldn't have any mechanical trash compactors within 80 feet. What we're talking about is your dumpsters, your trash compactors, that kind of necessary things for multifamily, but they wouldn't be within 80 feet of any property lines with the existing single-family residences. Access, we don't anticipate any access from the RM16 zoned area onto Overhill Court or Brentmead. Now, the exception to that would be an emergency access. I think they're traditionally called a crash gate. And the theory there is we would want to be able to get fire trucks or emergency vehicles both to the back of Brentmead subdivision, but to this property as well. And that's one of those things we hope we would never use, but it's one of those things that we would commit to if the city asked us to do it. Building materials for the RM16, what once again we're looking at is we're looking at materials such as brick, stone, real or faux, wood, fibrous cement siding, I think it's called hardy board sometimes, stucco, synthetic stucco, EIFS. But vinyl is not something that would be allowed besides soffits, trims, once again in windows, places that you're not going to see it. And corrugated metal would be absolutely prohibited. And we would want to use 30-year architectural shingles on any property that was shingled. Off-street and on-street parking, once again, will be screened, and streetscape elements within public right-of-ways will be consistent with the architecture. So the idea is you'd use your streetscape elements to kind of bring the design of the property together. Once again, the foregoing is just a summary of some of the voluntary commitments the Geralds and the Noble families have made. We feel like they feel like this is something that they need to do. These commitments have been done and made in good faith. We feel like it'll help with the design and shape good design in the future. That being said, we have had quite a bit of support for this application. We have several people who've written letters in support, one of which is Mr. Bill Rowland, who has done quite a bit of development in the community and owns property out on that corridor. With Chairman Lamb's permission, I'll have Ted Goodman from my office hand out a letter in support. I've got plenty of copies of it for everybody. So this is a letter in support of the application from Mr. Bill Rowland. And we also have letters in support of the application from HDK Partners, Mr. Stephen Dobson, who both is involved in the Regal Square development, and then he owns property individually along that corridor as well. And then Mrs. Susan Hicks also sent a letter, an email in support. She sees a need for retail on that side of Murfreesboro on the north side, and sees she doesn't want to drive across town to shop, and she would like to have more retail on the side of town. So that being said, Randy Caldwell is going to conclude our presentation. We'll be here to answer any questions, and what we'll do in the next two public hearings is incorporate our statements made during this public hearing.
And I'll make this short as a conclusion again. If I can get my PowerPoint back up there one more time. Again, I know we always have to justify what we're requesting. And one thing we heard from the neighborhood and others is, why are we, and I'm sure you're going to hear tonight, is why are we requesting commercial zoning when we don't have a specific use on this property? And we would like this body to consider this based on a land use decision. As my slide show earlier, this is on a 5-lane arterial right now. This corridor already has a commercial zoning extensively along it, as well as commercial uses that have developed along there. We have commercial to the south of us that exist already. and we think we're using the appropriate land use transition between the commercial and the neighborhood to help protect the integrity of that. Again, when you look at the Nobles property, given their configuration, 4.5 acres long, narrow property just doesn't make any sense from a residential standpoint, nor to split it in some shape or fashion. There are opportunities here, we believe, again, to provide some adequate acreage to create some design flexibility, to incorporate these design restrictions, allow people to use their design toolbox to come up with good design solutions to the issues that the neighbors have expressed out there. And we have some clients that are willing to incorporate those. Quite honestly, they're putting themselves at a competitive disadvantage. There's other properties along here that don't have restrictions on it, but they are trying to be sensitive to the neighborhood by incorporating these, by agreeing to adopt these as part of the development criteria for whoever might consider this property. And again, we've taken traffic, I know, is a big issue, and we've taken steps and efforts to protect the integrity of that. So with that said, that concludes our presentation. Brick and I will both be available to answer any questions as you go through the public hearing process.
Okay. Does anybody on the Planning Commission or the staff have any questions of the applicant's representative?
Chairman Lamb, I have one.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Caldwell, you mentioned in your presentation, I just want to make sure I understood it correctly, if the Nobles property is not included for whatever reason as part of the development, and if the RM16 ends up being less than 3 stories, you're asking for the buffer to go to 20 to 15, correct?
Only on the commercial highway with the Nobles piece, because again, it's a narrow piece of property, it's 4.5 acres, and the square footage that could be developed on that is much less impactful than the 4.5 acres as the two properties are developed. So we felt it was important to incorporate additional buffer as part of that if there is a larger retail, because that is a little more impactful on the neighborhood than a 4.5 acre tract. So because of the narrowness, we're trying to protect the integrity of the Nobles tract and the developability of that. And those are buffers that you've instituted in your zoning ordinance that you feel are appropriate for developments, and we feel that given this is a smaller development, if that occurs, that would be appropriate. Now on the multifamily portion, we're committed to the 20-foot buffer no matter what, the 3 stories. The one thing we're addressing, only asking, is that the building setbacks, again, with the 3 stories, we're committing to the same thing that was on the Haynes with the 80-foot setback and 50-foot if there's no windows or, decks facing there. But the only thing we're asking is to be allowed, if it's under 3 stories, to go to a 25-foot setback, which is required in the RM16, but I also want to reemphasize that is what a setback is even under your other residential classifications, your RS12, your RS10, and your other so we feel we're being consistent there.
Where I was going with it is I just want to make sure that I understood that if the setbacks were decreased, and now you've answered the question that is strictly to the Nobles property that would go to 20 to 15, that the Type D buffer and the 6 to 8 foot evergreens would still stay in place. That's my question.
Yes, that would still stay in place.
Thank you.
Because it's a Type D buffer there anyway, so,
right.
And I'm sure they'd be willing to commit to the additional height in the evergreen trees. So that's something we could build into that.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Any other questions? Okay, we have 3 separate public hearings scheduled on these 3 parcels, but because they are all so closely tied together, and we will probably want to consider the comments on all of these as a group, I think we'll hold off voting on each separate public hearing, making our recommendation to the City Council at the conclusion of all 3 public hearings. So we'll conduct all 3 public hearings and then ask for separate motions on each parcel. If you've not been to one of our public hearings before, what we'll do is open up the public hearing and invite anybody to come forward that would like to speak either for or against this proposal. Remember, each one of them will be specific for that particular section. The first one would be on the 15.9 acre parcel, which is the largest of the 3 parcels. I would ask you to make all your comments to the Planning Commission, and if you have any questions, we'll make a note of them and at the conclusion of that public hearing, we'll ask the staff to try to address your questions. At the conclusion of each public hearing, we may ask the applicant to come back forward to answer questions or make comments pertaining to what we might need to know. All that being said, one other thing, we do have quite a crowd here tonight, so we will be observing the 3-minute time limit, so I would ask you to be succinct in your comments and limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes at the microphone. So if you come forward, anybody, I'll open the public hearing at this time and ask anybody to come forward on the 15.9-acre parcel that would like to speak either for or against this proposal. Yes, sir. Come up to the microphone, please, sir. And state your name and address. I'm sorry, sir. The microphone wouldn't pick you up back there.
Yes, sir. I'm Ray T. Patton from 964 Walnut Hill Road in Lebanon, Tennessee, 37090. I own 8 acres on the south adjoining the Juro's property, and I'd just like to say that I'd like to see it zoned, the Juro's property be zoned commercial for further expansion of the city.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming up. Who would like to be next? Anybody at all?
I didn't say it, but that 8 acres includes Tommy Mobile Home Park. That's the part I'm talking about.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Chairman Lamb, Planning Commission members, my name is Terry Haynes. I reside at 1707 Riverview Drive, but I also happen to be one of the owners, along with my family, of the 30 acres or so that is across the street directly from the Gerald property that's in question. I really didn't realize that the Haynes property is going to be mentioned so much tonight, but I'm glad that we can set a standard, which is what we've tried to do. I think the commercial highway zoning is a logical zoning for the city to adopt. And there's been quite a mention about commercial highway both in directions to the north, south, and we have commercial highway also across the street. So it seems very logical part of the zoning process. The other thing is that I think is also important to the city is that this land is currently resides inside the city limits, and with it being that way, it can produce a broad tax base that helps keep our property taxes down lower by generating sales tax and additional property tax that currently this property does not generate and as much. And I think that's an important factor for you as planning commissioners to consider when you're looking at commercial highway in our city. And so I believe this is going to be a very nice development. I think they've done a great job planning this whole thing, and I'm definitely for it, and I would encourage all of y'all to be for it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Anybody else?
Good evening. My name is Brad Smotherman. I own a home at 730 Regal Drive that's in the Regency Park subdivision. My wife and I have found that the amenities on the north side are fairly lacking. She's not much of a cook, so every time we eat, we have to go to the west side of town. I hope she's not watching this right now. Obviously, RS-15 isn't the best zoning for this land. It has no uniformity with that corridor of the Memorial Boulevard. And you know, I really appreciate the owners of the land doing the restrictive covenants that they're talking about doing. Obviously, it's going to make that property a little bit less competitive in the market, but it's obvious that they also have that they care about the neighbors, and given that the buffer is going to be a little bit wider than what's necessary, and that the buffer is going to have some more it's going to be more dense with the greenery. I think that it's going to be a development that our community can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
My name is Heather Stevens. I live at 319 Kirtley Court. I live in Brent Mead subdivision. I feel like some of the concerns that we had at the neighborhood meeting, I left with more questions than I had answers. To the noise question, we had Mr. Adelot said that the road was already noisy. And so my question would be, why would we want to make it noisier for those of us that live in that subdivision? I can hear the bells from the VA hospital in my home when I'm outside my home. And I feel like if I can hear the bells from the hospital, I live in the middle of the subdivision, then of course I'm going to hear noise from a large business in the front of our subdivision. I am all for progress. I didn't move to my home so that I could live close to one of these giant stores. I moved there 8 years ago. We've been rezoned several times for schools. It feels like we are just being pushed and pushed and pushed. It's a little offensive to me to hear that stretch of road constantly called a commercial corridor. If you drive down the road, all the businesses on the road are small. They're not large businesses that would incur traffic problems. We are very concerned about leaving our subdivision already with no light in front of our subdivision. We run right into Kings Ridge. It's almost impossible in the morning to turn left. None of us do. These poor people in Crown Point. We go through their subdivision so we can come out at the light at Osborne. When we ask these questions at the neighborhood meeting, we're told we don't meet the requirements for a light there, but yet they seem very interested in putting a light in front of whatever business that would be. I'm also concerned about this multi-residential apartment. What keeps it from turning into Section 8? There are several apartment complexes that were built near residential areas, such as on St. Andrews, that were not, that were supposed to be just apartments that have later turned into Section 8. And again, I'm just concerned. We were concerned about property values, and we were told there's no answer for that. Noise, there wasn't really an answer for that, or traffic. So that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Anybody else? Nobody?
I wouldn't want to disappoint Mr. Caldwell. Good evening, Councilman and Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Tom Davis. I live at 502 Bluebell. First, I want to say I appreciate the Geralds and the Nobles having the meeting last week and asking our input and being so willing to cooperate. But I do want to say that I very strongly disagree with Mr. Caldwell's argument about using a land use argument for this. I don't think it's appropriate in this case based on the nature of some of the rest of what's up and down that stretch of Memorial Boulevard. Just cross Thompson Lane and look at the VA and something that's on the National Historic Register. And what has that got to do with commercial development? And he's using the Haynes property across the street to justify that. That was very controversial, very heatedly discussed. As far as I'm concerned, it was a bad zoning decision. So using one bad zoning decision to justify another, I think, is a very specious argument. I'm not against commercial development in this area. I think it's a foregone conclusion. But I think it's inappropriate and premature to rezone the property when the neighbors don't have any input into what's actually going to go there. It's premature. We're taking a property that was never developed commercial, that we're ripping this property out, and it's residential on three sides, and we're going to make it commercial, but we're not going to tell people what's there till down the road. I think it's disrespectful to the neighbors. I think we're setting a bad precedent for the development on down Memorial to some of those of us that will be affected later on. We're not fighting this one. We're not saying don't zone it. We're not saying, this is a bad use. We're saying let's wait till there's something out there where we can discuss a specific layout, a specific plan. Then we can rationally and reasonably discuss, are these restrictive covenants, are these agreements appropriate for that exact use? Otherwise, it's a pig in a poke, and I don't like pigs in a poke. If I were one of the neighbors in Brittmead, I'd be saying, I don't want to see it, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to smell it, if you're not going to tell me what it is. So give me a 16-foot high highway grade sound wall, 45 decibel restrictions at night, all that other wonderful stuff. And that's probably not appropriate either. The only way to determine what's reasonable and appropriate is to wait until we have an actual buyer, a proposed development, and set this precedent for the development of the rest of Memorial up and down the road. It's still a nice stretch. You've got the VA. What's wrong with looking at some medical office spaces or something else up and down those stretches? But that won't happen if we go ahead and zone it commercial highway. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Anybody else?
I'm Billy Pearson, 3026 Wessex Drive. And if I understood, Mr. Lamb, you said that we could not ask any questions from the people in the audience. That means...
No, so you can make all your questions to me, and we'll make note of them and try to get them answered at a later time.
Okay. I stand here not for it or against, more as a sounding board trying to get a little more info than we had at the neighborhood meeting. We fought a battle a year on the Haynes property, and it's been mentioned many times. And we were able to get restricted covenants that he finally agreed with the lawyers and came in, and we felt like they were workable, being as it was put into commercial highway. We're really against the RA 16 more than anything else. I appreciate the Gerald and Nobles coming forward and telling us that they were willing to put restricted covenants on that comparable to the Haynes property, which I felt like had moved the process a year ahead, at least. Now, there's some questions I would like to ask. They have went out and hired Mr. Caldwell as a landscape architect, but they do not know what's going there. I know you have to do architect a certain way. He did the gateway, very nice. Although in the last few months, they've tried to back up on some of that out there, but I think they've corrected that. I'd also like to know, if I heard right, if it's a 3-story, you would retain the footage on a 3-story, 80 foot. I was thinking it's 85 in the Haynes. I may be wrong. It's been a year nearly since I read that. And if you do zone it commercial, may I ask this question? If a big box wanted to come in there, which most of the neighborhood is against, and they didn't have enough of the Gerald property, can they take the Nobles property too? I want to know that question because Wayne Noble visited me yesterday, and he said he wanted to do what's right for the neighbors. He does not know what is coming on. He told me he bought it for investment, and when the Gerald moved CH, he had no other choice to move CH. He couldn't be here tonight because he had a meeting. So he mentioned some great restaurants. I agree, if you're going to go commercial highway, let's get 1 or 2 halfway to upscale restaurants up there. Sit down and not have to drive across town. Also, I hope you will protect Brentmead, as you have spelled out in the buffer. And if I also understood right, if it's less than 3 stories high on RS 16, then you will revert back to RS 15 or 12, which could be 20 to a 30-foot setback. I thought you had to be 35-foot minimum setback from property lines. And Wayne assured me that he would not combine his with the Gerald's if they needed more space for a big box. I take a man at his word. Thank you.
Mr. Adler, did you get his questions? 'Cause he had.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Just want to make sure you got your questions, Mr. Pearson. Thank you.
He had basically 4 questions.
Okay. Anybody else? Last call. Anybody else for this section of the public hearing?
My name is Randy Fan. I live on the north side of town. I don't live as near the property as most of the neighbors do here, but I do have a marital interest in some property across the street south of there. We're seeing a lot of smaller strip centers turn over, become empty, nothing left inside of it except another tobacco store. If we don't attract some bigger, well-funded stock, publicly traded companies on this side of town, we can expect more of the same. We need some deep pockets, and that in turn will attract smaller businesses that'll have a better chance to survive around the people with the big pockets. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Fan. Anybody else? Last call. Okay, I'll close this section of the public hearing. We'll move on to the next section. First of all, does anybody on the Planning Commission have any questions pertaining to this proposal here? We can wait later and combine them all if you want to. Mr. Adler, do you want to answer these questions right now?
I think it would be a good idea for me to answer a couple of them because it may it may help someone on their second question. I want to address Mr. Pearson's questions first. He had 4 questions, and the first is basically, why did the applicants hire a landscape architect if there is no plan? I think typically the idea is that if there is a plan brewing, they hire landscape architects to help them with the plan. In this case, I think that what motivated them to hire the landscape architect may have been me, because when Ms. Gerald began to inquire with me about how to make an application, what to do, we discussed that there was probably going to be a lot of interest in seeing restrictive covenants developed for the property that would be somewhat similar to the restrictions placed by the Hayneses. But there were also other questions that I wanted answered before I was ready to go out on the limb with the idea of commercial for this property. One of them being traffic management. I want to know about traffic management. I wanted for there to be some answers about if there are restrictive covenants made, are they done? Are they basically molded by someone who understands design, or are they just done by an attorney in his office? Now the Murphys are nice attorneys; they're very competent, but I don't know that Mr. Murphy would say that he's a design expert. I think he would tell you he's not a design expert, but that he can draft covenants, and he can probably do a good job with that. So in order to help Ms. Gerald to get some expertise to be able to develop covenants that Mr. Murphy could draft, they hired Mr. Caldwell. Now, that's my take on it. They may have a different take that might basically have another approach. But that's my understanding, and they can speak for themselves about why they actually hired him, because I just suggested that they hire him. Someone. All right, number 2. Let's talk about combining the Gerald property and the Nobles property. It is my belief that it would be best if the Gerald property and the Nobles property were combined in one development tract. It would be best because it would help with stormwater management for the 2 properties. It would be best from traffic management for the 2 properties. It would be best from buffering and design. However, we have 2 different owners who have 2 different needs, who acquired the property through completely different routes and circumstances, and their circumstances may not allow them to ever develop their properties together. On the other hand, they may be able to develop them together. One buyer may want both properties, one buyer may not. So it's possible it could happen either way. Now, Mr. Nobles, he may decide that he doesn't, in the future, does not want his property combined and may want to sell it separately. And that would be his right as a property owner. I don't know. But, Mr. Pearson, it's my belief that everybody would be better served if they were combined into one tract, because it would give better opportunities for design. But at the same time, I understand there's two property owners, and they may not be able to do it. So that's the answer to that one. Now, 80-foot or 85-foot for the 3 stories. Now, what Mr. Pearson is talking about there is that on the multifamily property, when it develops, at some point they will have buildings on there that will be placed on there. It may be, and how they're oriented may be different based upon what they want to do. If they're building a 3-story building, and it is, I think if it's parallel with the property line and has decks towards the single family, it's going to have to set back off the property at least 80 feet in the restrictive covenants. I think that's what they're talking about. And it's 80 foot, not 85 foot. That was the number, Mr. Pearson. It was 80 foot. But I will defer to them as to what they've actually drafted, because I've not seen this set of restrictions, but I was involved with the ones with the Hayneses. But I've not seen what they've been working on this week. And then I know your question was about if it's less than 3 stories, what would it revert to on the RM16? And I think what you want to know is what will the buffering revert to. And I think what they're saying is if they go to less than the 3-story building, they want to go back to the standard buffering that would have been required by the zone ordinance, independent of any restrictions. Is that correct, Mr. Caldwell? Or maybe it would be better if you explain what they really mean to do.
The one thing we'd ask is it would just revert to the building setback of the RM16. The buffer is still committed to the buffer criteria, but the building setback would go to a 25-foot building setback.
All right, so if it's 2 stories or 1 story, it would be a standard 25-foot setback rather than the greater amount. Does that answer your question, Mr. Pearson?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, Mr. Davis, I want to address you. Whether or not you ask a question, you did make a very strong statement, and I think that it deserves some discussion, or at least some analysis by me. You appealed to the Planning Commission that you're not so against the possibility of change in the zoning. What is concerning you is that you don't know what the use is, and it's hard for you to be able to react to what appropriate conditions or appropriate restrictions would be until you see an actual plan for the property. And that until you have an actual plan, you feel that it is premature for the Planning Commission to change the zoning. All right, Mr. Davis is nodding his head that was his question. Now, this is a philosophical question or discussion for the Planning Commission. If that is the approach that you want with zoning, then what you want to do is hold out for planned developments. The planned development approach is plan specific. And that's where we were about 3 years ago with every major development that was coming through. The Planning Commission and especially the City Council was saying we don't want to see rezonings until we know what the use is and we can make it part of a conditional approval, and we want planned developments. Now, as the economy began to stall, we've been backing away from that, and there are pitfalls to that approach. And one of them is it's a chicken or the egg situation. If there is other property that's already zoned, property that might be capable of being rezoned, is at a disadvantage from timing, because it takes about 2 months to prepare a plan, and then it takes another 120 days to go through a zoning process. So that's going to take almost 6 months to get through the zoning process. So someone wanting to start a project is going to be reluctant to go with a longer timeline if they're ready to go now. On the other hand, if the piece of property they're looking at is so unique and they know what they want to do and they're ready to do it, the planned development approach works good. And a good example, lifestyles. We saw a plan on off Medical Center Parkway earlier this year. The day they walked into the office, they had a good idea of what they wanted to do. and they were ready to do it if they were approved. And the property was going to require rezoning anyway. So for them, it didn't matter whether it was RM16 or a plan development. And in fact, they preferred plan development because they could change some of the zoning requirements, regulations, like the setbacks. So this is a philosophical question that I think you would need to offer to Mr. Davis during your all's deliberations. Is the plan development approach what you want to see on this property and others similar to it? Or do you like the standard zoning that we have used elsewhere in the community before we started using plan developments? So I'm going to let them discuss that during their deliberations a little bit more, Mr. Davis, but I think they understand your question very well now. I certainly do, and I appreciate your thoughts on it, because it is a philosophical approach to how a community is zoned. I want to talk about Mr. Stevens' questions. Noise. It's my belief that if there is a proper arrangement of buildings on the property between Brentmead Annex in particular and Memorial Boulevard, that they can serve to help mitigate some of the noise from the highway. On the other hand, they will likely generate some of their own noise. Every development has noise. Every building has a heating and air unit. Even when I quit talking, you will hear noise in this room just from the air handling units. Hear it? It's there. And it's louder than you think it is. The noise from the highway, because there is very little on the land between the subdivision and the highway, is traveling over an open plain. And particularly on cool evenings, I would bet you can hear it a whole lot better because the air carries sound better. But if buildings are placed properly, they can often divert noise in there. We've seen it happen on South Church Street, where people in Indian Hills had told me in some cases that they believe that buildings constructed between them and the highway would actually serve as a little bit of a noise barrier. But I want to tell everybody, all new development will create new noise. It may affect the existing noise patterns, and it may improve them, but they will create some noise themselves, just like our own homes do. Noise is something that is a little bit mysterious in how you deal with it. I don't know how to stop it. But I can do things about the things that are what I call nuisance noise that's short-term or project-related. During construction, there are hours of operation that they can construct legally certain distances from single family. And we'll enforce the noise ordinance when we become aware of problems. You also asked about traffic signals, and I want to talk about traffic signals just a little bit. A couple of different things. One of Mr. Caldwell's exhibits showed a potential traffic signal location that would serve this property. That is a potential signal. Memorial Boulevard is a state highway. Because it's a state highway, any signalization requires approval from the State of Tennessee Department of Transportation. Before they will approve it, they're going to have to, certain warrants will have to be met, and whoever wants to see the signal put up, and it's usually the city or a developer, will have to have a traffic study done and a warrants analysis prepared that will indicate that those warrants have been met. To date, the intersection with Brentmead Drive and Kings Ridge and Memorial has not met the 24-hour-a-day warrants that the state of Tennessee wants. We continue to monitor it because I rest assured, as soon as it's done, as soon as that is approved for signalization, our traffic engineer will breathe a sigh of relief because he knows how many calls he gets. He logs every one of them about that that intersection, and he is supportive of signalizing it. But he cannot get it done until the warrants are met. Now, one of the concerns during the neighborhood meeting was that, well, if you approve a signal down there, for this new property, you may keep us from getting a signal up at Brentmead. We don't want that to happen. What we have done is, part of what Mr. Caldwell did to help me begin to appreciate that this property had potential for commercial was to do enough traffic study to find out that there was sufficient separation between Osborne Lane and Thompson Lane and Kings Ridge, between Kings Ridge, Brentmead, and Osborne Lane, enough room for a signal at Regal Drive and to serve this property. See, we want to have certain spacing between signals. The spacing allows us to have a progression of traffic so that our transportation program can work effectively. So we cannot signalize every driveway or every place, because it'd be situations like Sulphur Springs and Northfield. They're so close that the traffic backs up from one into the next. We have identified a location in front of the Gerald property that could serve both the Gerald property and the Haynes property across the road, that could be signalized and secure the ability to signalize Kings Ridge and Regal Drive. So what some of the people at the neighborhood meeting were concerned was, well, you will sacrifice Kings Ridge to signalize this other one. And that's not the case. We want to see the ability to signalize all three of these locations when the warrants are met and the state of Tennessee will approve it. Does that help answer you a little bit better? I bet you'll still have questions after the meeting, so you're welcome to ask them at the next two public hearings. About Section 8, I'm not going to wade into Section 8 except for to say that when it comes to fair housing, the city of Murfreesboro cannot discriminate against housing and how it's funded. But what we can do is to enforce our zoning regulations. What the property owner is doing is putting restrictions on the property that will assure quality of development. Section 8 can happen in virtually any subdivision in our city. It's not a design. Section 8 housing is not a design. Section 8 housing is a way of the government helps to subsidize housing. So the city of Murfreesboro certainly can't discriminate against that. So, and it may be happening in your own neighborhood right now. So it's not that someone's going to develop Section 8 apartments. And property values, I've been around that so many times that I think that there is a big myth about it. When the market is escalating, or in one condition, everybody's properties are going up. Right now, I think we're all in a little bit of a free fall, and I think they're fixing to be going back up. Because when the economy is good, the property values go up. When the economy is down, we're all down. It's like a ship's in a harbor. And no one project, and we've seen this over the last 20 years, no one project seems to have any great effect upon anybody's property values. Does that help answer the questions? That's the ones I heard.
Yes, sir. I think you covered them all. Any other questions from members of the Planning Commission? Mr. Adel, thank you for addressing those. We'll move on to the next public hearing. That would be a zoning application for approximately 9.76 acres located at 3240 Memorial Boulevard from RS15 to, I believe we have a typographical error on my agenda here. It says CH, which would indicate commercial highway. I believe that should be RM16. So we'll make that change at this time.
Yes, please. That
okay.
is a
from
typographical error.
RS15 to RM16, Brooks Gerald Trust is the applicant. Mr. Caldwell, do you have any statements to make before we open this public hearing?
No, sir, I don't. We'd just like to stand on our previous presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Murphy?
I believe for the purpose of the record, we'd like to make sure the previous presentation is incorporated, so we would incorporate it by reference.
Yes, sir. That'd be fine. Okay, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Ask anybody that come forward that would like to speak pertaining to this proposal.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jonathan Hawkins. I live at 303 Braxton Drive in the Brentmead subdivision. My property is on the corner of Overhill Drive and Braxton Drive, and my driveway and backyard are directly across the street from the Gerald property that touches Overhill, the white fence area that if you have been in the neighborhood, you'll see that. A question that I have really, I came here tonight really to gather more information about the zoning request for all three requests. But a question that I have, I guess, would be about the crash gate and what that entails, what that entails for the Overhill Drive driveway, what that would look like. Would there be access from pedestrians or different things such as that? So that's really my question tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Anybody else?
Thank Again, I'm Brad Smotherman, 730 Regal Drive. I think that this is a reasonable buffer between the commercial highway and the residential community there. Obviously, we wouldn't want commercial highway or a really industrial development to be between the commercial highway and the residential development. And given that the construction materials are going to be similar to the Haynes property, which I felt was a good development as well, I think that this would be a reasonable buffer, and ask that you guys approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
I'm still Tom Davis, and I still live at 502 Bluebell Avenue. Just an opportunity to maybe amplify on the disjointed discussion that we've had here, Mr. Adelot. I'm not necessarily suggesting that planned development is the way the city needs to move in all of its deliberations. I think what we're talking about is a very specific subset that I think needs to be handled with care. You've got people that have been in these subdivisions that have lived there for 15, 20, 25 years, and when they moved in, they never had any dream that the property that bordered them would be anything other than what it is, residential or something like that. I'm not disagreeing we need good development. I'm not going to disagree we need deep pockets of people that are going to come in and do good, strong developments that are going to be there, but we still don't know what we're talking about. We've got people on Brentmead and people in Overhill that they're concerned about. They don't know when they look over the back fences what they're going to see. And if we go through this meeting and you approve it and it goes to the city council and it gets approved, you know what? They're still not going to know what they're going to see over their back fences in a few months. And I just don't think that's fair. If you're talking about an area that's undeveloped or under development, you've got commercial development going on at the same time as residential development. I mean, these people understand what they have to expect. But you're really talking about, again, people that had no idea when they purchased their properties and started living in them that 20 years from now the rules of the game are going to change. And I think these types of developments, and there's going to be a whole bunch more of them up and down Memorial, need to be handled with a little care and sensitivity, which is why I'm saying I think the residents have a reasonable expectation to know what effect a specific development is going to have on their life before it gets approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Anybody else? Nobody? Okay, so I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Adelot, I think Mr. Hawkins had a couple of comments or questions about the crash gate and pedestrian access.
Yes, sir. With multifamily developments in particular, we'd like to see more than one way into them, so that in the event of emergency, the fire department can respond. And as we've seen, and in this very neighborhood, a tornado can come through. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. With the crash gate, though, it's limited to only emergency access. And I keep on looking around for him. Where'd he go? Oh, there he is, right in front of me. Very limited emergency access. We want it to be available for our fire trucks to be able to get in. They have some of them have a noise. I'm trying to think of what it's called. A yelp mode. They call it a yelp mode. That when the siren goes into a certain mode, it will open the gate. And they check these gates periodically to make sure that they're working. We have them in several developments around the community, particularly multifamily developments or in some planned developments that have private streets. The fire department wants to see these. As the city's plan director, I like to see them because it gives us another way in and out. We don't want them to be designed with pedestrian access. We don't want them to be designed to be left open all the time. We don't want them to be available for construction entrances. In fact, on one development, the developer pleaded with me and the city engineer to let them use that as a construction entrance for the second phase, and we've just absolutely have denied that request and have told him he's going to come back to the Plan Commission if he wants to do that. And that was after he got his site plan approved. So how it will be designed, that's basically what you can expect. Now, it will probably have a gate, something that may have wrought iron. It may have columns. That may be left to the design professionals as they get closer to the site plan review stage. But we would want it open for emergency vehicles, but not pedestrians and not for vehicular traffic or for construction traffic. With the property back there on the overhill, there's one appendage of the Gerald property that comes out, and you all know it's got a house on it right now. The house was there before Brentmead Annex ever developed, before Brentmead ever developed. And it's sort of a remnant. It doesn't fit the street very well. It's kind of an oddball right there. And I think that if the Gerald property were developing with an apartment complex or an assisted living or something of that nature, that house would probably come down. We would like to see if it comes down, we'd like to see something of the nature of the emergency access. And they're leaving it as RS-15 because they understand that they don't need to be having any of the apartment complex onto that property. Does that help you?
Thank you, Mr. Adelot. Any other questions on this portion of the public hearings? If not, we'll move on to the third public hearing pertaining to this portion of land. The zoning application for approximately 4.5 acres located at 3268 Memorial Boulevard from RS-15 to Commercial Highway. Wayne and Kathy Nobles, applicant. Mr. Murphy or Mr. Caldwell, any statements?
I'd like, once again, and I know this is repetitive, but I think about these things. I'd like to incorporate our previous statements into the record for this rezoning application. I appreciate your time and attention, Chairman Lamb.
Your father's taught you well, son. Mr. Caldwell? Okay. Thank you very much. In that case, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak pertaining to this proposal. One at a time, please. Anybody at all? Okay. Sorry, I couldn't see you over there. Mr. Pearson.
Again, Billy Pearson, 3026 Western Drive. Do not oppose this commercial change because I think Mr. Noble should have the right as the Gerald property to be zoned commercial highway, and I stand for it.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Anybody else? Seeing nobody come forward, I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. Murphy or Mr. Caldwell, do you have any final statements you'd like to make?
No, Chairman, I appreciate it.
Any questions of the applicant from members of the Planning Commission?
Chairman Lamb, I want to ask a question, and it really should be oriented to Mr. Murphy. I know the answer, but I think it will be something that will be helpful to everybody who's interested. Mr. Murphy, we've discussed the restrictive covenants quite a bit. Would you kind of maybe lay out your all's plans for how you're going to develop them from here? We know that they've been in development, that you have, and we know that the city's not going to enforce them. But from what our discussions have been, and I want you to help confirm this, that you're going to continue to work on them if this is approved. You'll continue to work on them with the bullet points that you discussed, incorporate into them, refine them, and that you would not record them until after second reading by the council, if the council approves it, but that you would commit to have them recorded before third and final reading. Would you kind of offer that as, or maybe confirm that or discuss that?
Mr. Adelot, they're in bullet point format right now, and they'll be developing as we get additional questions and concerns expressed by the neighbors. We are committed to make the commitments that were made tonight, and I will draft them into a formal set of restrictive covenants. They will be recorded between the second and third reading of the City Council. If we get approval tonight and get subsequent approvals, I will draft a formal set of restrictions, and like I said, they'll be recorded and they'll run with the land, and they'll be on the property forever. And the goal is for them to shape the development of the property and them to be private covenants that really will have teeth and shape the development of what is to come there. But they're in bullet point format right now. As they evolve, I'll keep adding to those bullet points. We're using the Haynes property as a template and the restrictions that were put down on that property as the basis for these proposed restrictions. But there'll be a working draft, and I'll keep working on them right up through the second reading, and I will prepare a final copy before the third reading, and they'll be recorded.
Thank you for that, Mr. Murphy. Any other questions from members of the Planning Commission? Presume we need to conduct 3 separate votes in. We'll go back to the first tract of land here. If there's no questions, we'll move on, and I'll ask for a motion pertaining to the largest tract of 15.9 acres located at 3240, rezoning from RS-15 to commercial highway. Is there a motion pertaining to that tract?
Chairman Lamb, I'd like to make a comment and then make a motion with that after that comment. I think there was a comment made by Mr. Davis with respects to helping the neighbors know exactly what would be developed on this property, and I understand that comment. I mean, I think it's human nature to know or want to know exactly what something's going to look like or be at some future date. I also think that we're in a time and a place that we, as planners, cannot, or we're not in a position to exactly know, but I think that with the restricted covenants that have been brought before us, it is definitely a compromise that I have confidence that we can move forward with. I think without the restricted covenants that the applicant has approached us with, I'm not sure that I would feel comfortable with it myself. But with that and with the restricted covenants that are in place, I'd like to make a motion that we approve this zoning request.
Second motion.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Move on to the second public hearing that we conducted, the zoning application for approximately 9.76 acres at 3240 Memorial from RS-15 to RM-16. Is there a motion pertaining to that?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for approval of the rezoning from RS-15 to RM-16 on the 9.76 acre tract.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. The motion carries. And finally, the final public hearing of this location, the zoning application for approximately 4.5 acres located at 3268 Memorial from RS-15 to commercial highway. Is there a motion pertaining to this tract?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the zoning application for the 4.5 acres from RS-15 to commercial highway.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed. The motion carries. I'd like to remind everybody that came to speak tonight that these items will be forwarded on to the City Council for their consideration and also for another public hearing at that level. We have one more public hearing to conduct this evening. That is a zoning application for approximately 7.26 acres along Compton Road for a PRD amendment. Compton Road Builder Group is the applicant. Ms. Ely.
Thank you very much. Our fourth and final public hearing this evening is to consider amending the existing PRD, Planned Residential District Zone, on 7.26 acres of property that's located south of Compton Road. It's identified as purple on the map that is in your packets and also on the screen at this time. The property was zoned PRD in late 2005 under the name Compton Place PRD for development that would permit 60 townhome-type condominium units. The properties to the north and to the east are in the unincorporated area of Rutherford County and are zoned R-15, which is similar to our RS-15 zone. The property to the west and to the south is zoned RS-12. It's part of the reserve subdivision. And some of that subdivision is actually still under development. The development's not complete. So the PRD, as it exists today, was approved in 2005. In 2006, the development received site plan approval for the site. However, for various reasons, the development stalled and no buildings were ever constructed, although some of the site preparations and installations of utilities got well underway. And if you have visited the site, you would see that you can visibly see those utilities in the beginning of some streets. The current PRD program package allows a maximum of 60 units, dwelling units, and they're a townhouse-type condominium unit. The plan also calls for 2 car garages in each and every dwelling unit, plus a 2-space open-air parking space in front of the units that are in the driveways, and then approximately 36 visitor parking spaces distributed throughout the development. The applicants, or the owners now, are requesting to amend the PRD zoning plan to increase the number of units, the maximum number of units from 60 to 69 units, so that's an increase of 9 units. They're also requesting to make some changes to the development or architectural style of the units so that it will have a mix of units with and without garages, not mandate that all 69 units or however many do get developed have a 2-car garage, but that's of an option. And if they, with that option, they can choose either a 1-car, 2-car garage or a no-car garage unit. And the remainder of the property, and then they would increase the number of open-air spaces so that to accommodate the parking for the residents that will live in this area. In many respects, the development will be similar to another development called General's Retreat. And I've spoke to folks who have called me asking about this development and asked them if they had the time to drive along River Rock Boulevard and look at that development, General's Retreat, because this proposed development will be very similar to that. It's also the same developers, so that will give people a good idea of what to anticipate if this PRD amendment is approved by you. You've been included in your agenda packet as a program book, and it's titled General's Run. It provides you information about that describes the changes and evaluates the parking. Program book also includes a site plan of the existing approved development on a Mylar plastic sheet that can be overlaid over the proposed development so that the changes can be noted easily. So you should be able to see the differences by comparing those 2 sheets. The Planning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing before making a recommendation forward to City Council. We do have representatives of the application here tonight. Do you want to give a brief presentation or introduce the subject? I think Mr. Bill Huddleston is representing the owners, and he'd like to say a few words before you have your public hearing.
Thank you, Margaret Ann. Good evening, Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Bill Huddleston with Huddleston Steel Engineering. We are designing the site plans for General's Run, and I'm here with Howard Wilson, who's the developer of the project. From time to time, we bring you PRD amendments, and they look a lot different from what they looked like before. Tonight, this PRD amendment doesn't look very much different from what's been approved previously. Previously, we had approved 60 dwelling units. We're now showing 69 dwelling units. The primary difference is that in the previous application, those 60 units all had 2-car garages, and there were only 36 outdoor parking spaces interspersed around the development for visitors. We're now looking at more of a townhome type look for approximately 2/3 of the units, and in so doing, we have 102 spaces in parking lots throughout the development. This development is being marketed to what's called move-down buyers. These people are a little older. Their children have left the house. They don't need a larger home. Why does this sound familiar to me? They don't need a larger home. They need something smaller that they can take care of. So they don't need as much parking. Also, we will be, if this amendment gets approved, we will be bringing site plans back to you that shows more of our details, including drainage. The original project, the drainage did not get complete. This project does have significant drainage ditches and detention ponds so that we do not impact neighbors or the state right away on drainage. If you have any questions of me or the applicant, we'll be happy to answer them now or after the public hearing.
Anybody have any questions of Mr. Huddleston? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Of course, I'm going to ask a question, Mr. Huddleston. Sorry.
Excuse me.
Couldn't find my page. So do these, and I'm sorry, I can't tell, so all this parking that's here now outside, that's parking at the front of the units?
That's correct. Units 46 through 69 have two-car driveways in front of garages, either one or two-car garages. And then the other townhome-type units all have parking in front of them. And those are more in parking lot-type situations.
And so then there's still this little small island over here, like in front of 46 through 49, that would be additional guest parking?
That's correct. Those are extras. There's also a fair number of extras in the middle there where units 1 through 25 are located.
Okay. And so the majority of the 102 spaces are for the actual units, and then there's other spaces for visitor parking.
That's correct. With the move-down buyers that we talked about, based on the developer's market study, they only need 2 cars per unit, not even that in a lot of cases, but we're 26% greater than the 2 per unit requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's no other questions. I'll open the public hearing at this time. Ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
Hello. My name is Janet Hall. I reside at 712 Compton Road. Our property joins the 722 property on 2 sides. We were here in 2005. We've lived through all of this for 7 years. We're back again. This project is going to go on regardless of what we say or what we do. It's already been started, you might as well say. As in 2005, our biggest problem was drainage. We addressed the committee at that time. We were assured that we would even have less drainage on our property. Since the flood of 2010, as in with many cases in the county, this property eroded and has really caused lots of water coming down on our property, flooding many areas on our property, especially our garage numerous times. We have asked for help from the present owner, Mr. Wilson, Planning Department, Zoning, Codes, even the Department of Environmental and Conservation Group. We also attended a drainage program at Siegel School with the Holston Group. We offered pictures and information about this erosion to all. But seems like the word help was a dirty 4-letter word at that time. And most of the people who heard us at that time, you know who you are. Mr. Wilson, we contacted him several times. His last email was saying that he bought the property as is, and maybe we should sue the previous owners. So that did not help our situation there any. Without any help over the last couple of years, we have been forced to pay for landscaping, dozier work to be done to our property to try to channel the water away from our garage and property. We have also talked to our insurance company about flood insurance, but that turned out to not be an option for us. If this project is developed as slowly and in sections like its sister project, the General's Retreat, we are concerned the drainage will be even a bigger problem unless it's monitored very carefully. We have enjoyed all of this property that we can stand. When this project started in 2005, we were asked to work with the group. We let them remove fences and fence rows to try to let the project benefit them and us also. At this time, we will not give an inch unless we see sincere efforts put forth, which so far from Mr. Wilson and others we have not done. If some of you on the committee had put up with the invasion of privacy, dumping, water issues, the overgrowth with weeds, and even not feeling safe on your own property by being surrounded by these 7 acres, I just wonder what your attitude would be. I can really understand why a lot of people get so upset at these meetings. You live and make your home for 39 years on a piece of property, then others come in to develop these properties to make money. But we, the stable homeowners, are the ones put out in many ways. We are also concerned about any holding ponds that may be placed on the site. Mr. Huddleston here, I think, just answered that there were going to be 2. I would like to know exactly where and what the city's policy is on maintaining those. Since this property here with its overgrowth, we've had a tremendous amount of mosquitoes, which we have had people come in and spray to control. And I think this overgrowth there has contributed to it greatly. In closing, I feel we have already done everything we can do to protect ourselves, our property, by doing the landscaping, dozer work. We have installed a sump pump under our house and have a security system put in. Now I feel it's someone else's place to make sure this property is maintained and developed properly and correctly. I have some pictures here of the problems and the issues that we have encountered these 7 years, if anyone wishes to see them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Would anybody else like to come forward?
Council, I'm Susan Golden. I live at 729 Stonewall Circle, and if you look at on some of these flats, that's lot 17 behind this development. I have to agree. It has been a nightmare, but we cannot hold Howard Wilson responsible for that because he did just purchase that. However, it has been a nightmare. I'm really concerned about, is there going to be new blasting? Since some of these I guess the water retention places and all that, it terribly damaged my home, but it was within the year, and my builder did fix all of those. So that's one of my concerns. The holding ponds, and is the tree line going to be kept along that back property? And I do want to make sure that they do keep up the architectural review and the covenants on that. And I think Howard's pretty much going to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Golden. Anybody else?
My name is Don Hall, 712 Compton Road. At this time, I'd speak on behalf of Mr. Vosberg, who couldn't attend tonight. He owns the approximately 60 acres adjoining this project. His property is already part of a floodplain, and we've already mentioned about the flooding problems off this property, and any excess drainage onto his property would be detrimental and should be monitored very closely. Thank you.
Mr. Hall, is that the property to the east?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Nobody wants to come forward, then we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Adlock, we had several questions. I'm sure you made notes of those.
Actually, I didn't hear a whole lot of questions, but I heard something from Ms. Hall that is very sobering, because I think that during the public hearing process for the original application, she did speak. She expressed her concerns about drainage, and I think that what she has given in terms of testimony about the condition of the property is probably accurate. I think it's been a mess out there. I think it's been one of the things that I'm not very proud of. It's been a little bit of the economy. The answers to her questions about what will be done, I'm going to have to leave to our engineering department. I know it's on their radar screen. I'm thankful that someone's fixing to take the development and take it on and move it on, because it's been laid out there as a forsaken mess. It's one of the projects that's just got going, and then it came to a stop, and it was a mess, and it stayed that way. It's unfortunate that the situation is that way, but I'm hopeful that getting this back under these amendments will get this process back open to a recovery and take care of those problems. But I would defer to them about all the issues, because they really are the engineering issues. And it's failure of a project to move forward. Now, in terms of blasting, if it's not already in place, they may have to do some blasting. Most of the utilities are already in place, the sewer lines, the water lines. Ms. Golden, I think that it should be relatively modest compared to the project, because the original sewers are in, the water lines are in, a lot of the streets are in, so they won't have to be reblasted, I don't think. In terms of the tree line, I think absolutely the tree line is going to be preserved. They may have to do some trimming, just incidental, but it won't be take them all out wholesale.
Mr. Huddleston, would you
I think it might be interesting to hear from the developer about what he's going to do about the mess out there. I just cannot believe that Mr. Wilson won't step up here and absolutely address Ms. Hall's questions or statements. As a good neighbor, she has appealed to him, and I think he owes an explanation to you as well.
Mr. Wilson has given me the authority to assure to you that he will put that drainage in that goes around the halls as part of the first phase of this property. And he wants to be a good neighbor, and he's indicated to me tonight, after hearing the testimony here, that he will go ahead and put that in as part of the first phase of this property, because he understands the frustration that's happened out there. You know, the original developer went broke. The bank had it for 2 or 3 years. He has now purchased it, and he's ready to make something of this property. As far as the lady that lives on Lot 17 behind us, Mr. Alot's correct. Most of the blasting's already been done because the utilities are in. If there's any more that needs to be done, there are pre-blast surveys that are required by the state to make sure we don't impact neighbors. We have a significant landscaping plan that I think is part of your package, and it is certainly in Mr. Wilson's best interest to maintain the tree line that is there, and he'll be supplementing that with additional landscaping. The more that he can keep there, the less he'll have to pay to put in. So he does definitely want to keep the existing landscaping along the buffers. And then as far as the property to the east, that's 60 acres, most of our drainage goes north to the state right-of-way, where we have a big pond. It is a dry pond, though. It's not the wet pond variety that you're now seeing because of water quality. We also have a second pond for that east side, so that the water draining onto that east property will be less after development than it is now.
What about maintenance of those and mosquito control?
Those will be maintained by a homeowners association that'll be put in place.
How about the possibility of getting some stabilization measures taken inventory and taken care of immediately? Because I think that Ms. Hall has a very legitimate concern about the erosion that's taking place and the failure to get that fixed. Now, Ms. Hall, you've already had your chance to speak, so I'm sorry. But how about getting that fixed pronto to get that sort of thing resolved, so it doesn't continue to be a problem, so that the system works the way it was supposed to when it was initially installed?
Okay.
Would that be done? Would you step up to the microphone, Mr. Wilson?
The problem has been that the development never was completed, and of course, like Mr. Huddleston said, the bank owned it for many years, and they weren't going to do anything to it. And now I've come along and bought it, and I'm planning to fully develop the property and get the drainage fixed in accordance with the plan that Mr. Huddleston talked to you about.
Well, I guess maybe job one, get out there and maybe do some.
Yeah, and we have. We put some stabilization up, some hay bales and stuff to try to keep Ms. Hall's property from getting water on it, but that's not going to take the place of a properly constructed drainage pond.
And that's sort of what I'm getting at. We've had a project that's languished, and maybe today take some interim measures to get the system under control so it doesn't continue to languish.
Well, we've had a lot of projects languish, and I'm trying to correct that problem with this development.
And I'm very proud to see someone taking the project on and getting it moving.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any other questions? Ms. Jones, did you?
No, I understand now about
Any other
the ponds.
questions from
I was
members of the
looking for
plan?
the ponds.
Planning Commission? There's no other questions. We're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for approval. Is this subject to all staff? No, this is
Subject
zoning.
to all staff comments?
Well, it's a
Guess whatever
zoning
there are.
application.
Was there a second to that?
Second that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gilly. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. and Ms. Hall, for coming and bringing those problems to our attention. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the new business portion of our agenda. We have two items under that this evening. The zoning application for approximately 2.4 acres along Old Lascasas Highway to be rezoned from PRD to RM16. Rajesh Agarwal is the applicant. Mr. Adelot.
Yes, sir. The subject property is located along Old Lascasas Highway. It's just to the north of Rocky Lane. That is in turn just north of Greenland Drive. This property is located on the west side of Old Lascasas, as I said. Several years ago, it's 2005, that wasn't really several years ago, it was approved as a development for a 139-room rooming house. It was going to be oriented towards MTSU students, serve a private dormitory. Those plans have fallen to the wayside. Dr. Agarwal would just like to get the property rezoned back to RM16 as it was zoned prior to the plan development being placed on it. All the property surrounded is pretty much RM16 already, and he has made application to get the property rezoned. We need to schedule this for a public hearing, and the next opportunity will be August 1st. August 1st, we have one public hearing scheduled. Well, actually, let's see, we have more than one. What do we have scheduled already? We have the airport.
We have annexation and rezoning.
In the Murphy property, annexation zone of the Murphy property.
I'm wondering if we shouldn't wait to September unless there's a pressing need to get this done right now because of the length of time of that one. That
I am confident that the airport is going to take quite a bit of time, but I don't really think that the Murphy property is going to take any time at all because there just doesn't seem to be any resident population real close to it, and it seems to be a good fit. It can wait if that's what the Planning Commission wants to do, but I don't really expect a lot of time on this one.
Is there a representative of the applicant here, Mr.
Huddleston will represent that.
Is there some pressing need to go ahead and get this done on August 1st, or can this wait to September?
I don't think this will take that long.
I don't really know that there is. Mr. Adelot and I met with Mr. Agarwal. I think he's more interested in success than speed, so if you think it'd be better to hear it in September, I don't know if that's a big problem.
I was just concerned about it getting pushed to the very back end and be late at night by the time it got up. If people wanted to come and give testimony at it, they'd have to wait quite a long time if it was at the end of the public hearing cycle.
Just be on the safe side and put it on the September meeting. What's the date for that? It's the first Wednesday in September.
Let me look at my handy calendar here.
Should be somewhere like the 7th.
Let's all go to our smartphones.
And that will be September the 5th.
So moved.
September the 6th. No, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way.
Yeah, it's the 5th.
5th, you had it right.
The 5th of September. The motion has been made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Next item under new business is a street renaming study for a portion of County Farm Road to be renamed to Joe B. Jackson Parkway. The Planning Department is the applicant. Mr. Adelot.
Yes, sir. With the reconstruction of the Joe B. Jackson Parkway and actually County Farm Road and the extension over to the new interchange, Joe B. Jackson Parkway, the County Farm Road needs to be renamed. I think we saw this in the cards a long time ago, but with the construction of the new Walmart, it getting started, they're wanting their address on Joe B. Jackson Parkway. And not County Farm Road, and they don't want to have to change it. And with the construction project about to bid, it's time that we move forward with the street naming. This is something we're going to be coordinating with the county, and they're already working on it from their end. It'll be going to the county road board. The portion that's in the city, and that would be really just the portion along the front of the proposed Walmart site and in front of the Baskin Wood townhomes. Really, that's all that's in the city and within our jurisdiction to name. The county road board will have the jurisdiction of the remainder. we need to schedule this for a public hearing and before we take action on it. Mr. Blomley has a report that he's prepared. It's really short. It really shows you what the situation is. There'll have to be actually very little renumbered. But it's something that makes sense. It needs to be done. It's something we've expected, and it's time to move forward with it.
When do we anticipate the completion of that loop of Joby Jackson?
I would defer to our engineering department on that, but I'm thinking that the bridge project is going to be the better part of a 2-year project.
Okay. September 5th?
Yes, sir. That would work.
So moved. Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That completes the new business portion of our agenda. We'll move on to staff reports and other business. Ms. Treadlott.
Yes, sir. This is I guess, something that is your responsibility to do annually at the first meeting in July. Under the city's Planning Commission's bylaws, the chair and vice chair must be elected from its membership annually at our first meeting, and it's your responsibility to choose from your membership these two offices. You all need to discuss this, make a motion on who you want for your chair for the upcoming year and who you want for your vice chair as separate motions, and vote on them.
Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to elect Mr. Bob Lamb as chair of the Planning Commission.
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? One abstention.
Who was it that abstained?
That would be Mr. Young. I mean, me.
Mr. Lamb. All right. Let the record know.
Now we need to do a vice chair.
Vice Chair.
I'll make a motion that we elect Mr. Doug Young, Vice Chair.
Second motion.
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Unanimously carried. Mr. Adlott, do you have any other business?
No, sir.
Just no other business. We stand adjourned.